It started innocently enough. I had to borrow Anna's car because mine was acting up again. Something about the battery, or maybe it was the alternator. Either way, her SUV was the solution for the day. She handed over the keys with a smile that seemed just a little too forced, her gaze flickering away when I mentioned taking it to the mechanic after work. At the time, I brushed it off. As I drove to the hardware store, the GPS screen blinked awake, showing a list of recently visited addresses. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just tapping at the screen to adjust the route when I saw it. A series of locations I didn't recognize. The most recent one, dated just the night before, was a spot on the edge of town, nowhere near her work or anywhere we'd normally go. It was strange, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe she'd taken a detour to avoid traffic or meet up with a friend. Still, my curiosity got the better of me. At a red light, I tapped through the other addresses. They were scattered across the city, some in neighborhoods I knew, others completely unfamiliar. One in particular stood out, a spot near a secluded park on the far side of town. When I got home later that evening, I casually mentioned the addresses. "Hey, noticed some weird places in the GPS history. You been getting lost a lot lately?" I said it with a chuckle, trying to sound like I wasn't reading into it too much. Anna barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, probably just bad directions. You know how those apps are," she said, waving it off. Her response was quick, too quick, and her tone was oddly defensive. I let it drop, but her reaction stuck with me. After dinner, when she went upstairs to take a long shower, I sat in the living room, replaying the conversation in my head. Something didn't add up. I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling. By the time she came back downstairs, I'd made a decision. Quietly, I grabbed a pen and paper from the junk drawer and wrote down the last few addresses from the GPS history. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I couldn't shake the sinking suspicion that I needed to dig deeper. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling as she slept peacefully. My gut told me something was wrong, and I wasn't about to let it slide. The first step was figuring out where those addresses led. The next day, I took off work early, telling my boss I needed to deal with some personal stuff. That wasn't a lie, but I left out the part where I was playing amateur detective. I grabbed my car, patched up just enough to run, and hit the road with the list of addresses in my hand. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, a mix of nerves and determination swirling in my chest. The first two addresses were duds. One was a gas station Anna didn't normally go to, and the other was a strip mall with nothing special about it. Both could be chalked up to errands or some mundane explanation. For a second, I felt almost guilty for doubting her. But the third address, that one was different. It was a secluded park on the outskirts of town. One of those places you only go if you know it's there. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, far enough back to keep my car hidden behind a row of trees. Her SUV was there, parked in the middle of the lot, right where the GPS had marked it the night before. My pulse quickened as I scanned the area. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then, out by the benches near a walking path, I spotted her. Anna was sitting next to a man, leaning in close, her head tilted in that way she did when she was completely engaged in a conversation. He was laughing, his hand casually resting on the back of the bench, almost brushing her shoulder. They looked comfortable. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My Anna, my wife of 6 years, sitting there with some guy, looking happier than I'd seen her in months. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I stayed in the car, taking out my phone. My hands were shaking as I zoomed in and snapped a few pictures. They weren't the best, blurry and taken through the windshield, but they were enough to prove what was happening. As I filmed a short video of them talking and laughing, I caught a glimpse of her reaching out to touch his arm, her smile wide and warm. Who was he? And why was she here with him? When they finally stood up, I ducked lower in my seat. Anna didn't even glance toward her car as they strolled down the path, disappearing into the trees. I stayed for another 20 minutes, my heart pounding in my chest, but they didn't come back. Eventually, I drove home, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. That night, Anna acted like nothing had happened. She made spaghetti for dinner, chatting about her day as if she hadn't been cozied up with another man just hours before. I played along, my stomach churning with every lie she told without even realizing it. But now I had proof, enough to start digging deeper. Whoever that guy was, I needed to know. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had the full story. Something told me this was only the beginning. I couldn't get the image of Anna with that man out of my head. Her laugh, the way she touched his arm. It was all too intimate to pass off as harmless. My gut twisted every time I replayed the video, but I knew I had to keep my cool. If I confronted her now, she'd spin some story, make me feel crazy, or deny everything. I needed to figure out who this guy was before making my move. The next morning, while Anna was in the shower, I borrowed her phone under the guise of checking a weather app. My hands were clammy as I quickly scrolled through her contacts and recent calls. Nothing unusual stood out. No saved number for Loverboy or anything like that. But I did see a text from someone named James. I knew that name. It hit me like a punch to the gut. James wasn't just anyone. He was Anna's ex-fiancé. The same guy she'd once told me she never wanted to see again. Back when we first started dating, she'd mentioned how their engagement ended badly, how he'd hurt her, and how she'd completely cut him out of her life. Or so I thought. The text was short. Yesterday was nice. Same time tomorrow? I stared at the words, feeling my chest tighten. She was planning to meet him again, probably at the same park. My mind raced, connecting dots I didn't want to see. The man from the bench, that had to be James. I copied the number and sent it to myself, then put her phone back on the nightstand before she got out of the shower. Over breakfast, I kept up the act, pretending everything was fine, but my mind was running on overdrive. That afternoon, I did some digging. With a quick reverse phone lookup online, I confirmed the number belonged to James. I found his social media profile too. It was easy to see why Anna might have been drawn back to him. He had the whole polished, charming look. His recent posts showed him at fancy restaurants, hiking scenic trails, and even buying a new car. He seemed like the kind of guy who always had everything under control. But what pissed me off the most was the comments. Scattered across his photos were little emojis and flirty remarks from Anna, subtle enough that they wouldn't raise eyebrows unless you were looking for them. This wasn't a one-time thing. She'd been talking to him for months, maybe longer. The more I scrolled, the clearer it became. Anna had been lying to me about cutting ties with James. Instead, she'd been sneaking around with him, carrying on their little romance behind my back. I wanted to smash something, scream, do anything to release the growing anger inside me. But I knew that wouldn't help. I needed more proof, something undeniable that she couldn't talk her way out of. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, I felt like I was sleeping beside a stranger. I kept thinking about the way she laughed with him, the texts, and all the times she looked me in the eye and lied. This wasn't just a bump in the road. It was betrayal, plain and simple. And the worst part? I knew it wasn't over. Tomorrow, she'd be meeting him again, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I didn't sleep much that night. The anger churned in my gut like a storm I couldn't calm. Anna slept soundly beside me, oblivious, or maybe just good at pretending. The next morning, she got ready like it was any other day, humming to herself while she tied her hair back. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out, her usual, "I'll see you later," carrying a sting I couldn't ignore. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys. Her meeting was etched into my brain. Same time tomorrow. I tailed her at a safe distance, my heart hammering as I followed her to the same park. She didn't even try to be discreet. Her car rolled into the lot and parked in the same spot as before. I pulled into a spot down the road, just out of sight. Sure enough, James was there, waiting by the same bench. Watching them together was like getting stabbed with a knife and twisting it deeper with every second. She walked up to him, smiling in that special way I thought was only for me. He pulled her into a hug, and I swear I saw her rest her head on his shoulder for a moment. I couldn't stay hidden this time. I'd had enough. I got out of the car, my steps heavy and deliberate as I made my way toward them. It was like they didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in their little bubble. It wasn't until I was standing a few feet away that Anna's head snapped up. Her face went pale as she saw me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and panic. "Brian, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice loud enough to make a jogger glance over. What the hell are you doing here, Anna? With him. James stepped back, holding his hands up like he was innocent. Hey man, this isn't what it looks like, he started. But I wasn't in the mood to hear his excuses. Shut up, James. I know exactly what this is, I snapped, pointing a finger at him before turning back to Anna. You told me you were done with him. You lied to my face, over and over again. Anna's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's not what you think, she finally said, her tone defensive. We're just talking. It's nothing serious. Nothing serious? I barked out a bitter laugh. You've been sneaking around for months, texting him, meeting him here. And you want me to believe it's nothing serious? Do you think I'm that stupid? James took a step forward, his expression shifting to something cocky. Look, Brian, maybe you're not giving her what she needs. If you were, she wouldn't be here. That was it. My fists clenched, but I stopped myself from doing something that would land me in jail. Instead, I turned back to Anna. So, what is it? You're just meeting up with him for kicks? Is this your idea of fun? Anna crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You don't understand, Brian. I needed someone to talk to. You've been so distant. Distant? I repeated, my voice rising. I've been busting my ass for us, working long hours to make sure we're comfortable. And this is how you repay me? By crawling back to your ex? She looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. It's not like that, she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what is it, Anna? Tell me, because I'm done with the lies, I demanded. For a moment, I thought she might actually admit to it. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of guilt, but just as quickly, her mask slipped back into place. I've told you everything you need to know, she said coldly. This is just a misunderstanding. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. A misunderstanding? Fine. I'll clear it up for you. I'm not playing this game anymore. You want to keep lying? Go ahead, but don't think I'm sticking around for it. With that, I turned and walked away, ignoring James's smug smirk and Anna's frantic calls for me to stop. I didn't look back, let her stew in the mess she'd made. When I got back to my car, my hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. She wanted to lie? Fine. I'd get the truth, and when I did, there'd be no way for her to talk her way out of it. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Anna to spin more lies. The confrontation at the park had confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't going to come clean unless I forced her hand. If I wanted the whole truth, I had to dig it up myself. The first step was her phone. I'd seen enough of those sneaky texts to know there was more where they came from. That evening, while Anna was upstairs taking one of her marathon showers, I grabbed her phone from the coffee table. Her password was still the same. Our wedding anniversary. That bit of irony wasn't lost on me. I scrolled through her messages, starting with James. The texts were flirty, yes, but what really caught my attention were the deleted threads. A couple of apps let me recover the messages, and what I found made my blood run cold. There were texts like, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you," and "I'll try to come by this week, but Brian is getting suspicious." It wasn't just casual flirting. It was a full-blown affair. She'd been sneaking around behind my back, meeting up with James in hotel rooms, at the park, even during times she told me she was working late. The messages also hinted at how long this had been going on. Months, maybe even a year. She'd been lying to me for that long, playing the doting wife while running back to her ex-fiancé whenever she felt like it. But there was more. I found messages between Anna and a mutual friend of ours, Jenna. They were cryptic, but it was clear Jenna knew about the affair. Worse, she was encouraging it. "You deserve to be happy," Jenna had written. "If James makes you feel alive, don't let anyone tell you it's wrong." Alive? Was that her excuse? That I didn't make her feel alive anymore? I saved screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. Then I closed the apps and put her phone back where I'd found it, my heart pounding the entire time. Anna came downstairs a few minutes later, smiling as she asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I could barely look at her, let alone sit next to her on the couch. The next day, I called Rebecca. My sister had always been my rock, the one person I could trust no matter what. I told her everything, the texts, the meetups, even the smug look on James's face when I confronted them at the park. Brian, you need to get out of this marriage, Rebecca said bluntly. She's not just cheating on you. She's manipulating you, lying to your face, and making you feel like it's your fault. You don't deserve that. I know, I said, my voice cracking. But I can't just walk away without a plan. I need to make sure she can't twist this around on me. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want my help?" I hesitated. Rebecca wasn't the type to hold back, and I knew if I let her get involved, things would escalate quickly. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. "Yeah," I finally said. "I need all the help I can get." Over the next few days, Rebecca and I worked together to gather more evidence. She suggested I install a tracking app on Anna's phone, which would let me monitor her location and messages in real time. I hated how sneaky it felt, but then again, Anna had started this game. I was just playing by her rules. Rebecca also reached out to a friend of hers who worked in IT, asking for advice on how to recover deleted files and track hidden activity. With his help, I found even more damning evidence: hotel receipts, secret emails, and even photos of Anna and James together. They weren't exactly subtle. It was worse than I'd thought. This wasn't just some fling or a momentary lapse in judgment. Anna had built an entire second life with James, one where I was nothing more than an afterthought. And the worst part? She didn't even seem guilty about it. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed: messages, photos, locations, even timestamps proving how long she'd been lying to me. Now, I just had to figure out what to do with it all. Confront her again? Expose her to everyone we knew? The ball was in my court, and I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. The more evidence I uncovered, the angrier I became. But it wasn't just anger. I was hurt, confused, and disgusted by how far Anna had gone to cover her tracks. The lies weren't just casual. They were calculated, cold, and worst of all, she seemed completely unbothered, going about her days like nothing was wrong. Then, things got even worse. It started during a heated argument a few nights after I installed the tracking app. Anna had been unusually tense, snapping at me over the smallest things. I'd asked her about her day, something innocent, and she'd rolled her eyes like I was prying into her deepest secrets. The tension finally boiled over when I mentioned the park. "Why don't you just tell me the truth, Anna?" I said, my voice sharp. "You've been meeting James. I've seen you with him. I know everything." She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it again, maybe spin another ridiculous excuse. But instead, she put the fork down and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing James. And honestly, I don't regret it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to process what I'd just heard. "You don't regret it? After everything we've been through?" Anna shrugged. "What do you want me to say, Brian? That I'm sorry? That I made a mistake? I'm not. At least James makes me feel alive. With you, it's like I'm just existing." "Existing?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I've been working my ass off to give us a good life, and this is how you feel? Like I'm not enough?" Anna's gaze hardened. "You don't get it. You never have. Our marriage has been over for a long time, Brian. I just didn't want to be the one to pull the plug." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, what? You've just been stringing me along, lying to my face, while sneaking around with your ex?" Her expression turned smug. "Honestly? Yeah. Do you know how hard it is to keep up appearances? To pretend everything's fine when it's not?" I stayed because I didn't want to deal with the fallout, because I didn't want to look like the bad guy. Her words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw something, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let her see how much she was getting to me. "Is that all?" I asked coldly. "Are you done?" Anna hesitated, then smirked. "Almost. If you're looking for someone to blame, maybe you should take a good look in the mirror. You're the one who made me feel like this. You're the reason I needed more." I stood there, silent, as the weight of her betrayal settled over me. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything. Her lies, her manipulation, her complete lack of remorse. She didn't just betray me. She destroyed any semblance of trust or respect we'd ever had. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, but my words were razor sharp. You know what, Anna? You're right. This marriage is over, and you're going to regret every single choice you've made. I left the room before she could respond, slamming the door behind me. In the silence of our bedroom, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. If she thought she could get away with this, she was dead wrong. This wasn't just about exposing her anymore. It was about making sure she felt the consequences of every lie, every betrayal, and every ounce of disrespect she'd thrown my way. And I knew exactly how to do it. After Anna's confession about James and her brazen attempt to blame me for her actions, I knew the time had come to do something definitive. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure Anna couldn't keep getting away with her lies. The damage she had caused, not just to me but to the people who thought they knew her, had to be laid bare. I started with the evidence. Every photo, every text, every video, meticulously organized. It wasn't enough to just confront her. I wanted her entire web of deceit exposed. Rebecca helped me fine-tune the presentation, ensuring every single detail was unmissable. This wasn't just about proving she cheated. It was about showing everyone exactly who she was. Next, I made my list. Anna's parents were at the top, followed by her close friends, James's wife, yes, she was part of this too, and a few of Anna's co-workers who had somehow bought into her perfect wife routine. I wasn't interested in public humiliation for the sake of it. This was about accountability. Every person who needed to know would see the truth. I considered whether I should confront Anna one more time, to give her a chance to explain herself, or to at least let her know what was coming. But then I remembered how smug she had been, how she told James on the phone that I was too weak to do anything. No, she didn't deserve a warning. When the video and supporting documents were ready, I crafted a simple email. No theatrics, no long explanations, just the evidence and a short message. This is the truth. You deserve to know. I scheduled it to go out at 8 a.m. the next morning. Anna had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't about to spoil the surprise. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything we'd been through. The early days of our relationship, the laughter, the moments I thought were real, they all felt like distant memories now. The person Anna had become, or maybe had always been, was a stranger to me. Tomorrow, she'd face the consequences of her actions, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. I drifted off to sleep with a strange sense of calm. The storm was coming, and Anna had no one to blame but herself. The morning came quietly, almost deceptively so. By 8 a.m., the emails were sent. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, waiting for the fallout. Anna was still upstairs, likely scrolling her phone or preparing for another day of pretending everything was fine. Not today. The first sign that the plan was working came just before 8:30. Anna's phone, sitting on the counter, started buzzing uncontrollably. Calls, texts, notifications all pouring in at once. I watched her rush downstairs, her expression shifting from confusion to dread as she picked it up. The color drained from her face as she read the messages. What is this?" she stammered, glancing at me. I set my coffee down, keeping my voice steady. "It's the truth, Anna. Your truth. I just made sure the people who matter know it." Her hands were trembling as she scrolled through her phone. "You sent this to my parents? My friends? My coworkers?" Her voice was a mix of anger and panic. "And James's wife," I added, meeting her gaze. "She deserved to know too." Her face twisted in fury. "You bastard! How could you do this to me?" "Me?" I shot back, standing up. "I didn't do this to you, Anna. You did this to yourself. I just stopped protecting your lies." She tried to argue, but the sound of her phone ringing interrupted her. It was her mother. Anna hesitated, glancing between me and the screen, then declined the call. Another one came through immediately, her boss this time. She declined that one too, her hands shaking more violently now. "I can't believe you'd stoop this low," she spat, her voice cracking. "Do you know what you've done to my life?" I laughed bitterly. "Your life? What about mine, Anna? You lied to me, cheated on me, and tried to make me feel like I was the problem. You don't get to play the victim now." She tried to throw out more excuses, more blame shifting, but it didn't matter. I'd heard it all before, and none of it worked anymore. The evidence spoke louder than her words ever could. I watched her crumble in real time as the reality of what she'd done, and what everyone now knew, hit her. By the afternoon, the fallout was in full swing. Anna's parents showed up at the house, furious and heartbroken. They demanded answers, but Anna couldn't give them anything except weak excuses and crocodile tears. Her friends, the ones who had once believed in her perfect marriage, were texting me, apologizing for not seeing through her facade sooner. James's wife emailed me too. Her message was simple: "Thank you for sending this. I knew something was wrong, but now I have the proof I need. He's out of my life for good." That was enough for me. Knowing James was facing consequences too made the whole ordeal slightly less bitter. Anna spent the rest of the day locked in the bedroom, alternating between sobbing and yelling at anyone who tried to reach her. I didn't bother comforting her. She wasn't my problem anymore. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. Rebecca had already offered me a place to stay, and I was ready to take her up on it. As I drove away, I felt an odd sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, the weight of Anna's lies was no longer mine to carry. She destroyed everything we had, but now the truth was out and the consequences were hers to face. After the video and emails circulated, the fallout came fast and hard. Anna's perfect little world was crumbling, and I wasn't sticking around to watch her try to piece it back together. I stayed with Rebecca for the first few days, letting her house become my safe haven while I sorted out my next steps. The first sign that the damage was irreparable came when Anna's parents called me directly. Her mother was in tears, her father furious. They were embarrassed, hurt, and above all, disappointed. They'd always treated me like family, and to hear that Anna had betrayed not just me but them as well, it was too much for them to process. "She told us you were distant," her mother said over the phone, her voice breaking. "But this is unforgivable." Her father, usually calm and measured, was more blunt. "Brian, I don't blame you for exposing her. She brought this on herself. Whatever you decide to do, we support you." Anna's friends weren't much better. The ones who had stuck by her through thick and thin now found themselves reeling from the truth. Claudia, one of her closest friends, reached out to apologize. "I had no idea, Brian," she said. "She lied to all of us. If I'd known, I never would have defended her." Even at work, Anna couldn't escape the fallout. Her boss, who had been on good terms with both of us, was less than impressed with the scandal. The video circulating among mutual contacts made its way into the office, and while it wasn't enough to get her fired, it certainly tarnished her reputation. From what I heard, she was suddenly excluded from meetings and projects, her co-workers keeping their distance as whispers spread through the office. James didn't come out unscathed either. His wife wasted no time filing for divorce, citing the evidence I'd provided as proof of his infidelity. She sent me a follow-up email a week later, thanking me again for exposing the truth and updating me on her plans to start fresh. James, on the other hand, had gone radio silent. I didn't hear from him directly, but I knew from mutual contacts that his life was unraveling just as quickly as Anna's. For me, the fallout came with its own challenges. While I had Rebecca and a few supportive friends in my corner, I still had to deal with the emotional toll of everything. Nights at Rebecca's were quiet, but my mind wasn't. I'd sit up late, replaying the last few months, questioning how I'd missed the signs and what I could have done differently. I filed for divorce less than a week after the video went out. The process was quicker than I expected, partly because Anna didn't have much ground to stand on. With the evidence stacked against her, she couldn't fight for anything substantial. The house, which I'd paid for entirely, was mine. The joint accounts were split, but I'd already safeguarded most of the savings before the split. She left with little more than her car, a new one, since I'd sold her old one, and her clothes. The paperwork was finalized within a few weeks, but the emotional scars took longer to heal. I couldn't look at our wedding photos without feeling a pang of anger and sadness. Even the smallest reminders, her favorite coffee mug, the throw pillows she'd picked out, brought back memories I didn't want to relive. Rebecca, ever the rock in my life, encouraged me to focus on rebuilding. "You've got your freedom now," she said one night over dinner. "Don't waste it by dwelling on her. She's not worth it." She was right. Anna had already taken too much from me. It was time to start taking my life back, piece by piece. In the weeks following the divorce, my life slowly began to rebuild itself. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of what had happened felt almost unbearable. But with every day that passed, I started to feel lighter, freer. Rebecca's house had become my temporary sanctuary. She never pressured me to talk about what I was going through, but she was always there when I needed her. We'd spend evenings watching old movies or having long talks about anything but Anna. It was exactly what I needed, time to process without judgment or interference. One of the first steps toward moving forward was reclaiming my space. The house that Anna and I had shared was filled with memories, most of which I didn't want anymore. I made the decision to sell it, and with Rebecca's help, I found a buyer quickly. Packing up was bittersweet, but it felt good to finally close that chapter. With the money from the sale, I rented a small apartment in a quieter part of town. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. The first night there, I sat on the floor with a takeout pizza and a beer, looking around at the blank walls and empty spaces. It felt good. It felt like a fresh start. Work became a welcome distraction. My boss, who'd been understanding throughout the entire ordeal, gave me a big project that kept me busy. The focus helped me push past the lingering anger and sadness, giving me something to pour my energy into. My coworkers, who had heard bits and pieces of what happened, were supportive without prying, which I appreciated. One night, as I was scrolling through emails, I saw one from Claudia, Anna's former best friend. She'd cut ties with Anna after the video, and her message was short but kind. "Brian, I know I don't have the right to ask how you're doing after everything, but I just wanted to let you know I'm rooting for you. You didn't deserve any of this. If you ever need a friend, I'm here." I didn't respond immediately, but her words stayed with me. They reminded me that not everyone in our lives had turned their backs, and that moving forward didn't have to mean cutting myself off from everyone. Over time, I started to focus on myself in ways I hadn't before. I joined a gym, partly to burn off the lingering anger, and partly because it felt good to work on something tangible. I started hiking again, something I'd loved before Anna and I had met but had let slip away over the years. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd forgotten existed. Anna, on the other hand, wasn't doing so well. Word got back to me through mutual acquaintances that she'd lost her job after the scandal became too much to handle. Her parents had distanced themselves, and most of her friends had either cut ties or simply stopped engaging. Even James, her so-called fresh start, had disappeared from her life after his wife divorced him and moved out of town. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. As the months passed, the pain of what she'd done began to fade. It didn't disappear entirely. I doubted it ever would, but it stopped defining my days. I focused on the things that brought me peace: long hikes, quiet evenings in my apartment, and reconnecting with old friends who reminded me of who I was before Anna. One evening, Rebecca asked me if I had any regrets. "Not about the divorce," I said after a moment, "but I regret letting her take so much of my time. I regret not seeing the signs sooner." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Well, at least you've learned something from it. And you've still got plenty of time to make up for what you lost." She was right. The experience had taught me more about myself than I ever expected. It had taught me about resilience, about trust, and about the importance of listening to my instincts. Most of all, it had taught me that I deserved better, better than Anna, better than the lies, better than the life I'd been living. As I sat on my apartment balcony that night, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wasn't entirely clear, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant taking the lessons, the scars, and the strength I'd gained and using them to build something new. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.